Hey, Javier. Thanks so much for the resubmission. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, first composition. I'm seeing that you do have somewhat of a grid established here. It's kind of difficult to tell how many rows and columns you have, but you definitely are adhering to a common margin in the first three layouts anyways. We can see that common margin here, 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 on the top, on the left, on the right-hand side. So, but you're breaking the grid right here. But actually, you're breaking the margin. So that type line right there is too close to a no print zone. You always want to you always want to respect your margins. Even if you're breaking the grid, I think that right there looks like a mistake because you've broken the margin. When you establish that margin, and just make sure you don't encroach that margin once it's established. The fourth composition doesn't have the respect for that margin. In other words, right here, you can see you're right up on the page edge here and right over here on the page edge. So we don't see, when I say that the fourth composition isn't respecting the margin the way the first three are, what I mean is that you've got your margins established, but here you're breaking those margins. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the compositions. Now, in the first composition, you have well, before we look at each individual composition, let's go ahead and take a look at the whole. So don't forget, the space between the four squares is supposed to remain at 1 inch. Okay, this looks wider than this, so check that. That's got to be 1 inch, 1 inch on the gutter, and 1 inch on the space between the two top compositions and the two bottom ones. So an inch here and an inch here. Make sure that you have that established. First composition looks good. You've got all of your hierarchy based on grouping. That's fantastic. Second composition is good. Couple of issues in the second composition, but you have introduced one new weight and one new size. So you're introducing scale and weight here. That's fantastic. Over here, you've got multiple weight, multiple scale. That's excellent. However, over here, we've got some alignment issues right here, okay? So you can see this is on a diagonal right here instead of a line. That should be perfectly aligned, and it should be aligned with this. Right now, that last word there is aligned here, but these first two lines here are indented a little bit. So we kind of have this kind of angle right here. So there's no alignment right there. So get that aligned, and you'll be good. Then we also have a little bit of an issue with what happens after we get here. Okay, so this is first position in hierarchy, right? It's got the most weight, it's got the most contrast. Then you're telling the viewer you want them to go here, okay? Now then you're telling the viewer you want to go here, right? But this kind of sits alone. My question is, should this be grouped over here? Okay, so in other words, should you have this same kind of grouping here over here? Okay, because right now this seems to be sitting off by itself, which indicates to the viewer that this is not related here or here. So try to work your grouping in this composition as well. Grouping is great over here. This is a really good composition right here. You're paying attention to your multiple weights, your multiple scales. One thing I see a little misalignment here is this isn't the 1967. The 9, that margin right there, you're kind of out of alignment right here. So make sure you tuck that over to align with the 1 in 1967. Also, your baselines aren't aligning over here. Okay, so you see the baseline of this. You come over here, this should be pulled down a little bit so it's in alignment. Remember, in typography, in a typographic composition, a really good rule of thumb is that everything should align with something. Okay, so this perfect alignment right here would be to make sure that you pull this down a little bit so that baseline aligns with that baseline. That's a good composition, very effective, good hierarchy. I think this might be the same composition that was turned in for the first iteration. Let me just jump up here and see if I can find it. It's not. Wait a second, Javier. Okay, no, it's not. You did. Okay. I see what's happening. All right, let me jump back down there. So you addressed the issue of stretching. That's great. I'm so glad you did that because that's really, it's a practice that a lot of amateur designers do, and it's a professional, it's a sign of a professional designer when you are not skewing or otherwise distorting your type. So whenever you resize, make sure you constrain those original portions. Now over here we have Okay, so this composition is supposed to be multiple scales. So you have multiple contrasts in weight and scale, and then you have the image bleeding on two places. Right now, this image bleeds only in one place, okay? So the logical solution here would be to pull the card down. You may even consider reducing the size a little bit and pulling the bleed right here. That's going to force you to move this type over, and you'll have to recompose this type. Now this, remember, this composition, typographically only, is supposed to have multiple contrasts in weight and scale, but we don't have that. You've got basically, okay, I see what you're doing. You've got scale right here. You've got weight and scale right here. But we would need something more like this, where you've got multiple weights and multiple scales, right? So right now, we go from this being the number one position in hierarchy to where does the viewer go next? You're not letting the viewer go next because there's no hierarchy right here. In other words, there's nothing that's contrasted to the point where the viewer looks at it and goes, okay, this is the second most important part of the page. This is where the designer wants me to look. You see what I'm saying? Here, it's easy, okay? This is the biggest, the weightiest on the page. The viewer knows you're supposed to start there. So the viewer at this point knows that they're supposed to go here because this is the second most contrasting in terms of weight and scale right here. So the viewer knows headline, then right here. Here, the viewer doesn't know where to go. Okay, so this needs to establish some kind of typographic hierarchy through here. Okay, and then these, I'm not sure about pulling these away from the rest of the composition. I mean, they are related, so they should be close in proximity to the main content, right? Okay, other than that, vast improvement over the first set. So you see how quickly we improve in establishing typographic hierarchy. And this is something that, again, in typography, typographic skills are able to be cultivated very, very quickly. And that's the one thing I love about teaching typography, is that students can learn something on Monday and review it on Tuesday and start applying it to their design work on Wednesday. So it's an immediate learning process, and that is what I love about teaching typography. So good job, coming along beautifully. So try those changes recommended for your final submission. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the repost too. Thanks, Javier.